Hello and welcome to the latest extra covered show from theextracover.com. I'm Tom Maston. Joining me for today's show is our Middlesex and General London reporter Jack Sheldon. Hi Jack.
Good afternoon.
We'll be discussing the latest round of LV County Championship fixtures, including a first defeat of the season for Sussex and a win that takes Worcestershire to the top of Division 2. But there's only really one place to start this week, and that's the game you were at, Jack, at Lords, where Middlesex completed the third highest championship chase in history. 472 they chased down against Yorkshire to record their second straight win at the home of cricket. Jack, going into that fourth innings chase, I don't think there were many people who were expecting Middlesex and Chris Rogers to pull it off, were there?
No, I think most people had written Middlesex's chances off after they got bowled out for 113, I think it was, on the second morning. Yorkshire, a very strong bowling attack who thrashed Middlesex twice last season, and after the first innings looked on course to do so again. I think that most people at Middlesex, including the players, including Rogers actually, who said at the close that Yorkshire is still his tip for the title, rate Yorkshire very highly. So it came completely out of the blue. I mean, the conditions facilitated it in some ways. It was a week where cloud cover rather than pitch conditions were the real factor, and for the first day and a half you had thick cloud cover, then it lifted and you had glorious sunshine for the rest of the match. But I mean, even so, Yorkshire are such a good bowling attack, and chases of 472 don't happen very often.
Yeah, what was it? And obviously the pitch was obviously a good one, a better one than those first innings scores suggested. So what was it? Was it Yorkshire's bowlers just having a day and a half off in terms of form, or was it just the brilliance of Rogers and those who supported him?
I don't think Yorkshire's bowling was that bad. Jason Gillespie, talking at the close, said that he thought that they were a little bit off, maybe bowled a bit too full, maybe attacking a bit too much on the third evening. But they came back well, bowled pretty well with the new ball, and so on the fourth morning. And so I'd put it down to Middlesex's batting really. Rogers and Robson form now a very well established opening partnership, and they complement each other superbly. Rogers these days is quite an attacking player. He's often pigeonholed as a blocker because he doesn't play 2020, but actually at first class level he often scores at a strike rate of 70 or 80, as he did throughout this innings, and that allows Robson, who's more methodical, less instinctive, to sit in and not be placed under too much pressure at the other end. But it was an absolute masterclass from Chris Rogers. It'll go down as, I'm sure, one of the greatest innings played by a Middlesex batsman. I mean, curiously enough, the overall record for the highest championship run chase is also held by Middlesex in 1925, and Patsy Hendren got 250 not out. I mean, obviously Angus Fraser wasn't around then, but he's seen a lot of Middlesex cricket since the 1980s and said that since then this is the best innings he's seen by a Middlesex batsman.
Yeah, you've seen a lot of Rogers obviously over the last 2 or 3 years whilst he's been at Middlesex. He's obviously coming towards the end of his cricketing career in terms of age, but how long do you think he can go on for, not only at county level but also international level? I see he's earmarked the 2015 Ashes as an immediate target. Do you think he could continue even further along the line?
Well, he's been asked a few times in interview, and he has said the 2015 Ashes a few times, so I think that's what he's thinking about at the moment. I mean, as far as Middlesex are concerned, I think the question will be whether he comes back next season. This is the last year of his contract, and given the amount of cricket he's played, both at home and away, I think he's played county cricket pretty much every season since 2004 or 2005, so he's been playing 12 months round. He might decide after another winter with Australia, if he's still in Australia's plans, to take those first couple of months of the season off next year before the Ashes. So it will be interesting to see if he comes back for Middlesex.
Yeah, from a Yorkshire perspective, runs for Gary Balance, a very impressive 130. Last time you were on the show, we were discussing a century for Sam Robson and whether that pretty much secured him a place in England's Test side. Does this innings from Balance, following on from his 100 last week, secure his place in that team to play Sri Lanka?
I think it should do. I mean, in some ways, he's somebody who doesn't get talked about an enormous amount for somebody who has such a good record. I mean, certainly before the last couple of years, you've heard a lot more about Ben Stokes, James Vince, Joe Root, James Taylor, people like that than you have about Balance. But he's averaging over 50 in first-class cricket. I think this was his 21st first-class century, which is, outstanding for a youngster. I don't think Joe Root, for example, is in double figures yet in terms of centuries. So it was an outstanding innings, and the importance of it for England is that it was an aggressive innings, because there are going to be lots of people who maybe haven't seen so much of Balance, and the young players who haven't played much international cricket, who are going to say, how are England going to replace Kevin Peterson, and say, well, Owen Morgan's going to have to play because they've seen him hitting sixes in one-day cricket. But I think Gary Balance is the better first-class player and can certainly play that aggressive role if needed.
Yeah, and finally, on that game, the big talking point, taking you back to Sunday, was Yorkshire's decision, A, to leave Andrew Gale out, and B, to hand the captaincy to Joe Root. What did you make of his captaincy over those 4 days?
It was an interesting call, and there'll probably be some people at Yorkshire questioning, would it have been different if they'd had the experience of Andrew Gale there rather than somebody captaining only his second first-class game? Would Andrew Gale's experience have been worth an extra breakthrough when Rogers and Robson were running away with things on the third evening, for instance? But I thought Root did a decent job. He was quite aggressive. He put fielders in interesting positions, kept his slips in pretty much until Middlesex needed 100 or 150 to win. There might be certain things that he could have done, but there wasn't anything noticeably bad. I'd probably have stuck with Gale. I think it's a massive call to leave somebody that experienced as a captain out of what's already a young team. But yeah, I don't think Root can take too much of the blame for the eventual result.
Yes, certainly. We'll wait and see whether Gale makes his way back into the side as Yorkshire play Durham this week. But obviously a morale-boosting win for Middlesex in that thriller. Moving on in Division 1 and to the other end of the table, where last year's two promoted sides, Northamptonshire and Lancashire, did battle at Wantage Road. Lancashire, despite a poor first innings total, coming out on top in the end. James Anderson taking 10 wickets in the match, and after Peter Moore's leaving and a couple of disappointing early performances, that's a big boost for Lancashire, isn't it, getting their first win back in the top flight?
And they had to win this game. I think if they'd lost this one, things could have started spiralling out of control a bit. I think this was a match which was always going to be about the bowling attacks. Both batting lineups struggle at Division 1 level. Lancashire, it's a problem that's been around for a few years. They went pretty well with the bat in Division 2, but even in their championship winning year, and then certainly the year they got relegated, they haven't quite fired with the bat at the top level. You've got guys averaging in the 30s that haven't really kicked on to become really prolific batsmen at the top level. I mean, it is a worry that they got bowled out twice against a Northants attack that was missing an overseas bowler. Didn't look enormously strong on paper. David Willey obviously not fit well, so I expect Lancs will be looking at some changes for the next game, probably taking Agafandhu out.
Yeah, and in terms of Northants, that's 2 defeats and a battling draw against Durham, but not looking good for them. We all know their injury issues and everything else that's going on at Wantage Road, but are they slowly becoming this year's Derbyshire? Do they need to turn their fortunes around sooner rather than later?
They do, and they were hoping to bring an overseas player in, but talking to Kieran Thomas, our reporter at Wantage Road, it seems that they've had a third player falling through. Sohail Tanveer's not happening now because he's in a Pakistan training squad, so it's just it's unbelievable bad luck for Northants. I mean, I'm sure they'll keep trying to get somebody in, but with the 2020 approaching, it becomes harder and harder. I mean, maybe they'll have to see whether they want to play Richard Levy in some of the championship games when he's over for the 2020.
Quickly on that game, the runs in that game for Joss Butler. Matt Pryor still out injured for Sussex. We don't know if he might return this week to play Lancs, but those runs for Joss Butler in a tough situation will certainly give him his former coach Moore's push in the right direction in terms of a test place, isn't it?
It is, and I think I've always said with Butler that I think he's got work to do in first-class cricket, and I think he still does. I think England's inclination will be to pick Pryor, but obviously this Achilles seems to be causing more problems than they thought, and there isn't really an obvious candidate apart from Butler if Pryor isn't there. I mean, some people have said Craig Key's better, but he hasn't had a particularly outstanding start to the season. Nor has Stephen Davis. And you're beyond that. It's you're getting a bit. You'd rather pick the young man, I think, than go for somebody who's some people would like to see a real specialist gloveman like Foster, Reed, or Simpson play, but I really can't see that happening.
Yeah, well, certainly a big win for Lancs, and Northants need to turn their fortunes round, you feel, if they're going to be competitive in Division 1. Moving on and to Somerset, who are one of only two now unbeaten sides of division, as they felled league leaders Sussex by an innings. Lewis Gregory with 9 wickets and a century for Marcus Trescothick. Somerset have looked impressive this year, haven't they, Jack? Are they showing that last year's poor form was maybe a little bit of a blip?
Yeah, I mean they started with a flat pitch draw against Yorkshire, then a game that they could have lost against Durham, but eventually they saved it quite convincingly on the last day in the end with Nick Compton's 100, and then this was a really impressive result. I think that most people would have had Sussex down as big favourites to win this one. So yeah, I mean, Lewis Gregory's a big find for them because the bowling is the problem that people have been talking about with Somerset. Until towards the end of last year, he was seen as an all-rounder, but whatever he's done, he seems to have been able to channel his bowling to greater effect. He seems to be swinging it a lot more. He's bowling with the new ball now. This time last year, even though he bowls up in the 80s miles an hour, he was really seen as a batting all-rounder in Championship cricket. So he's massive for them. And then, Trescothick, after the Durham game, people were asking questions, could we have a retirement from him even before the end of the season? But, this will have put those doubts to rest for a while against an excellent Sussex attack. And looking at the scorecards, that seems to be the innings that won a low-scoring game on a pretty difficult pitch.
Yeah, in terms of Sussex, their first defeat of the season, although they do stay just ahead of Middlesex at the top of the division, despite their good start, are they relying too much on Ed Joyce with the bat? He's been one of the outstanding batsmen of the opening month of the Championship, but other than that, a couple of 50s and Matt Pryor's 100, he's now out of the team. Is Joyce taking too much of the burden on, do you feel? Do others need to step up?
But yeah, others do need to step up. I mean, I think Luke Wells played a half century as they got rolled over during the first dig of this one, but they do need the likes of Rory Hamilton-Brown to step up and rediscover some of his Surrey form before long. And they'll be waiting for Chris Nash's return to the side, I think, to really bolster them. They look a little bit weak with the bat, but they're still a pretty strong side. I mean, I think there's no side that haven't had a difficult game so far in Division 1. If you look at the 3 top teams so far, we've seen Yorkshire lose to Middlesex lose to Sussex, and Sussex drop 1 to Somerset. So, you can afford a couple of these defeats during the season, but it'll be interesting. They'll want to get back to winning ways in the next couple of games, certainly.
Yeah, and the final game in Division 1 was at Trent Bridge, where Nottinghamshire fell to their second straight defeat against Warwickshire, who in turn won their first match of the season. Another century for Ian Bell for Warwickshire, but maybe more pertinently for them was a return to form for Chris Wright. I saw Wright at Lancs the week previously, and he did seem, especially in the second innings, to be getting back to the pace of that 2012 year when he led them to the title with the ball. It's good news for the Bears, isn't it, if Wright can help the likes of Barker and Wokes take 20 wickets?
Yeah, and it's important because a lot of people that have been tipping Warwickshire for the title have been counting on these guys who did well in 2012 and then missed a lot of cricket in 2013 due to injuries and so on to pick up where they were in 2012. And perhaps they were a bit slow to find that form in the first couple of games, but it does seem that Wright is back in nick now. And when he's on form, he's always a danger because you don't see that many 90-mile-an-hour left-arm bowlers in the county game.
Yeah, certainly. Well, we'll leave that Division 1 there for the time being, as Sussex lead the division after 3 or 4 games, depending on the counties. And we'll move into Division 2, where the leaders are a surprising side in Worcestershire. A lot of people have written Worcestershire off, Jack, but after seeing off Derbyshire this week, that's 2 wins from 3, as well as getting the better of a draw against Hampshire in the opening week. Can they maintain this form through the season? Are they going to be this year's Derbyshire and this year's Northamptonshire?
But they've done it before, haven't they? A few seasons ago, I think, after Steve Davis and Vikram Solanki left, people had written them off, and then they came back to finish second and get promoted the last time they got promoted from Division 2. And Syed Ajmal seems to be massive in this game against Derbyshire, taking 8 wickets in the match with his spin. Important 100 for Alexei Kavesi as well, who's probably somebody who needed runs this year to stay in the county game, I would imagine. This is really good for the guys at New Road who have put in such a big effort to get the ground ready after the flooding problems during the winter. I think they can keep it up. I mean, Moeen Ali is still an absolutely critical player for them. He scored 99 in this game, and the word seems to be that England are seriously considering playing him as an all-rounder in the Test side. If that happens, he's going to miss a lot of cricket. I mean, I'm sure he'll be named in this squad to play Scotland, which is being named later today, and playing the one-days against Sri Lanka as well. So, yeah, if they miss him, their batting starts to look a bit thin. But they've got some decent players there. Their worry will be their squad size. I mean, I think Middlesex have 25, 26 players in their squad. Warwickshire a similar amount. Worcestershire only have 15 first-team players in their squad. So you're talking about, if Ali goes on England duty and you get a couple of injuries, you're pulling in real academy kids and trialists, and then you might have a few difficulties.
Yeah, certainly ones to watch though, Worcestershire and a team that are certainly surprising a few at the minute. At the other end of the spectrum, Derbyshire, they're losing. That's 2 defeats from 3 for them. Many people tip them for promotion, but this has been a difficult start. Jack, do you think the issue regarding Tom Point and his father is possibly still playing on a few minds, or is it just a lack of form at the start of the season?
Yeah, and obviously it's the Poynton incident will have troubled them in some ways, but some would also have said it was galvanised them. I mean, I think it was always going to be more difficult for Derbyshire than some suggested. I think they've got a young squad with few real standout players apart from Chanderpaul, Tim Grunewald, and maybe Stephen Moore, who they signed over the winter. They did come good as a team towards the end of last year, and I think they'd have been hoping to continue that momentum. And perhaps you're right, maybe the Poynton business kind of killed any momentum that they'd built up in pre-season, because they did have a really good pre-season. They had an excellent tour of the UAE at the start, certainly, where they inflicted some defeats on Worcestershire. I think, but I don't think they're going to struggle all season. They will put a good run of games together because they do, they have the Division 1 experience there to do that. But maybe it's going a bit too far to suggest they're going to challenge for the title again this season.
Yeah, certainly a big job for new coach Graham Welch to do to try and turn their fortunes around. Moving on, and the other 3 games in the division all ended in draws. The first of which was at the Ageas Bowl between Hampshire and Surrey, where rain heavily affected the game, and there was hard. I mean, there was any play on day 3, and they struggled to get on the first day as well. But amongst the wet weather was yet another 100 for James Vince, and Peter Miller, amongst others on Twitter, is getting the James Vince for England bandwagon going. How far down the pecking order do you think Vince is? Is it going to take him to a full season of runs akin to Compton and Moeen before the England selectors really take him seriously?
I think in the immediate future it'll be one-day cricket that he's thought about for England. I mean, he's played that quite well for a couple of years, and you can make a real good case, I think, to pick him in the one-day side. I'm not sure he'll be in it immediately because there are quite a few opening bats hanging around. I think that they'll want to start the in quote-unquote new era with Cook and Bell together at the top, and obviously Lum got 100 in the West Indies in the ODIs, and Alex Hales is there or thereabouts, and Moeen Ali. But in terms of Test cricket, I can't really see it this summer because there is a stack of players queuing up to get in there, probably led by Balance for the middle order, but also Morgan, Taylor, Ali, at a stretch, guys like Bopara. And Vince didn't have the greatest of Lions tours, but with the start that he's had to the season, he's certainly proving that last year wasn't a one-off, and that actually the first couple of years he had in first-class cricket, where he took a while to get to grips with the format, were the exception, and that now he's really going to kick on and make his claim. I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the Test side come the winter if things continue to go badly, but you can never be certain with these things. Sometimes players just get unlucky with timing, and if England's team settle in and start doing well, he might find that he struggles to get into the side.
Yeah, he is only 23, Vince, so certainly time on his side in that sense. Moving on from Hampshire Surrey and on to Essex's game with Gloucestershire. Hundreds there for Gloucestershire for their young batsman Will Tavares as well as Alex Gidman. But the innings that struck me most was that of young Ben Foakes for Essex at a career best with 100 in a big partnership with his skipper James Foster. Foakes, a man who went on the England Lions tour during the winter of 2012-13, but has struggled to get back into that side since. A wicket-keeper by trade, but he's behind Foster at the minute at Essex, Jack. Is there a situation brewing there similar to the one that there was at Somerset maybe last year with the Butler and Keyswater situation? Will Foakes eventually have to go elsewhere to get the keeping opportunities that he might need to push into that England side?
Yeah, and if Foster's going to play for a few more years, I think he might. Because Foakes has been a bit of a slow developer for the talent that people said a few years ago, because he has been talked about for a few years now since his under-19 days, and maybe part of what's been holding him back is that he's struggled to get into the Essex side regularly, in part because Foster's been in the way. So, it's always possible that those things will happen. It's not quite the same as Somerset, where there's an immediate England context, because I think Foakes' first concern will be to make sure that he's a regular in the Essex side and starts to get some wider attention with that before he really worries about not getting the keeping gloves. But yeah, it's certainly something that could come in down the line.
Yeah, and the final game from this week saw Leicestershire draw with Glamorgan. Other than Glamorgan's opening week win over Surrey, they're two teams that have drawn at all their matches. Leicestershire, another positive performance for them, making 500 in their first innings, runs for Niall O'Brien amongst others. And in the end, Glamorgan had to battle for a draw, Jack. Is there a worry at the Sway leg that after beating Surrey so well at the Oval in that first week, that they haven't quite kicked on in their two matches that followed?
Yeah, they've lost a bit of momentum, haven't they? I don't think the weather has helped entirely, even though they've been holding on really in both games by the end. But games can take a different course if you get a full 4 days play to if you get bits and pieces of play with periods of cloud cover and so on. But a lot of people have started to tip them as the outsider for the title. People are looking for who's going to be this year's Derbyshire, who's going to be this year's Northamptonshire. And yeah, it looks like they're a little bit behind the 8 ball at the moment. But certainly positive signs for Leicestershire. It's still not a win. Their long winless run goes on, but they're getting closer. I'm sure it won't be long until they do get a win.
Yeah, we may even have to have a Leicestershire-themed show just for when they finally do end that run of that winless run. Finally, just moving on away from the matches and the one major bit of news, and it seems to be the major bit of news we've come to the end of the show every week for the last 3 weeks, but finally a done deal. Kumar Sangakkara is going to play for Durham, but only for 2 matches, Jack, and they'll be a bit disappointed on it, Chester Street, that they've only managed to bring him in for a couple of games. It was only going to be 3 anyway, but to lose him for that one game they hope to have him is a bit of a blow, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's the frustrations of the system really, which a lot of counties are feeling. Northants as well, is that the way both work permit rules and the ECB's rules are at the moment, you can't just fly a player in. It's not that simple. You have to get all your paperwork in order. I think there's been some problems with, there's been a succession of Sri Lankan public holidays as well as the Easter holidays over here, which have delayed paperwork and so on. But it's good that the deal's signed, and I think He'll will be influential on the dressing room. They'll be glad to have him for the game against Yorkshire, which is, even though Yorkshire have just suffered this heavy defeat, it's going to be another exciting close game, and they'll benefit from his services.
Yeah, certainly looking forward to watching Kumar Sangakkara in what is the first televised fixture of the year this week, as well as to take on Yorkshire at the Riverside. But for now, I think that's all we've got time for, so all it leaves me to say is thank you very much to Jack.
Thank you.
And remember that all the latest county news is on deepextracover.com. After the technical issues of early this week, the site is now back online with all the reports from the week's matches just gone, previews for the upcoming matches coming up on Friday and Saturday. We're on Twitter at deepextra_cover with live match updates at DEC_scores. I've been Tom Maston, and thanks very much for joining us.